This is DBrief, brought to you by the Australian Industry Group.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to DBrief, or welcome back if you're a regular listener. This is Australian Industry Group's monthly podcast on the recent developments in Australian industry policy and what it means for you and your business, especially in terms of the three critical aspects of today's changing world, the 3Ds: digitalisation, decarbonisation, and the diversification of your business operations to ensure we are no longer subject to single points of failure or unnecessary risks and disruptions. DBrief, a briefing on the 3Ds. My name is James Scotland, and with me, as always, to unpack the issues of the month, as only she can, is my co-host and industry policy specialist and the head of industry policy and development for the Australian Industry Group, Louise McGrath. Hello, Louise.
Hi, James. How are you today?
I'm feeling good. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We've got a lot to talk about. It's been a busy month, hasn't it? There's the federal budget. It was released, providing a clearer picture on the priorities for the next 12 and more months. There's a new report on manufacturing in Australia. Last month, we spoke briefly on nuisance tariffs, so I thought we could unpack that a bit more. There's been a recent announcement on battery production in Australia, and maybe we'll even talk about quantum, because that kept getting mentioned in the budget. So there's a lot to chat about. First, though, let's talk about the federal budgets. Budgets are always a process of balancing the various demands of the community, the requirements of the prevailing economic conditions, and, of course, a host of political necessities. This year, the challenges of the budget were a softening economy, persistent inflation, and a rapidly transitioning economy to a decarbonised future. So, Louise, I'm wondering, can you give me a sort of a headline? How did it go? Was the budget a good document?
Whether it's a good document or not is, always in the eye of the beholder. It does, as you say, give us some clarity on the strategies and priorities of the government. I think there are a couple of broad themes across the budget, not just for business, but obviously it's not just all about us, it's about the whole economy. So first theme was addressing the slowing economy and the global economic uncertainty. Second was managing inflation, particularly in households, and we saw that very high profile, energy bill subsidies, which was also linked to cost of living support. The Future Made in Australia, which I think we'll dig down into a bit more today, and education, skills and training, which was really to support the Future Made in Australia and generally what can be done about protecting the future of the Australian economy to address the slowing economy, managing inflation and cost of living.
Yeah, there's always a lot in there. It's hard to figure out, how it all adds up. Like you say, it's in the eye of the beholder. AI Group made some submissions beforehand. One was in the area of decarbonisation, where there's a raft of ideas that we put forward, more support for a level playing field for energy transition investments, support to accelerate the implementation of innovation in the decarbonising industries, provide some resources to support business, a bunch of others. What happened? Was there good announcements regarding decarbonisation?
Well, I think overall, we always put in our best efforts. And as you say, we put in a pre-budget submission that looked at what we wanted from a vision and a pathway for an Australian economy that is decarbonised, digitalised and diversified. And we asked for action in supporting the energy transition, which included regulatory reform and assisting with investment. But we also asked for support for industry to decarbonise and to adjust increased regulatory burden related to the energy transition. Mm-hmm. So we got half of what we wanted. So, the catch cry, Future Made in Australia, is really where this is all about. So according to this budget, the future is essentially only about clean energy, with $22.7 billion invested over the next 10 years. So that's really our answer to the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. Mm-hmm. But it's sort of it's a shadow of an answer, because at $22 billion is quite literally $500 billion short of the scale of investment in the US Inflation Reduction Act. We never were going to be able to match the IRA. Because we just don't have such deep pockets. But, traditionally, as a smaller economy, we don't have the same money, but sometimes not having as much money forces you to make smarter choices. we won't know for about 10 years until we have made the right choices. But that money, that $22 billion, is spread pretty evenly over the key categories of renewable energy products, innovation in key clean technology, critical minerals, and hydrogen. But that support for that clean manufacturing is really narrow. So it's specifically for solar, batteries, low carbon fuels, and green metals. There's just was no money to assist legacy industries to transition to a decarbonised world.
Was that a surprise? Because that sounds like a surprise. It sounds like that's where the pain's going to be.
Well, I think if we look at, how are we going to reduce our net emissions as a whole country, helping industry and those legacy industries adjust is going to I think, be the biggest bang for our buck. It can't all just be around renewable energy investments. We don't currently make solar panels. We don't currently make batteries. So, helping to make them isn't going to change our overall net overall emissions reduction targets. So we had received some indication that there would be support, and we're still being told, it wasn't right for this budget, but it might be in the MyEFO, which is around October, November, the mini but little budget. But, until we get the announcement, until we get money on the table, we won't be able to judge that.
I think in our last episode, you made the comment that the Future Made in Australia was lacking detail. Did we get enough detail now?
There is a bit more detail. It's not the detail we wanted. We thought a Future Made in Australia would help all manufacturers, but it's really, as I said, really narrow. And both critical minerals and hydrogen will receive production credits and subsidies. So that really confirms that the Australian government, along with many other Western governments, is betting that countries and consumers will pay a premium for non-Chinese supply of green materials, energy and critical minerals. We talked about that, I think, in a previous episode. I'm sceptical, frankly, that a European consumer will make that choice, like all consumers, especially in a high inflation world. We're all choosing the cheapest. But also, essentially what we're doing is subsidising that purchase. So Australian taxpayers are subsidising those decisions now globally by making it easier for other customers to make that choice. The big thing, though, part of that, which is sort of linked to the diversification, that bet that Western consumers will pay a premium for clean energy and critical minerals from Australia will fail unless we can demonstrate traceability. And there was a little bit in the budget, $32 million investment into a guarantee of origin scheme, which is to create the scheme and to work out how using technology, all sorts of, chain of custody, et cetera, and then not just working out what we think it looks like, but then working with our trading partners to make sure they recognise it and, can adjudicate and verify it, to make sure that that consumer is, or whoever is buying, whether it's a sovereign agency, is confident that our critical minerals are coming to them without destroying the environment, without using forced labour, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I've spent the last 20 odd years dealing with the complexity of the rules of origin for physical goods. So to me, the challenges for such rules in fungible products like hydrogen or lithium, think of the lithium in your phone, can't even see it. How do you know where it's come from? I just think it's immense. And, there's that Greek thought experiment, Theseus's ship. The ship leaves the port, and then at the next port it needs repairs, and so on until finally the end of its journey it comes back to original port. Every single plank of wood, every nail has been replaced through repairs. Yeah, right. Is it still the same ship?
I've got my grandfather's axe. My grandfather replaced the head, my father replaced the handle, but it's still the same axe.
Yeah. So it's that sort of spirit thinking that it counts on rules of origin, and we'll see. We'll see if that $32 million, that's really what is underpinning the whole $22 billion.
That brings us to decarbonisation. No, it doesn't. It brings us to digitalisation. And in the budget pre-submissions, we asked to promote the responsible use of artificial intelligence, upgrade the cybersecurity capabilities of business, ensure digital skills are part of the skills and training systems, and digitalise the Australian supply chain through data and free trades. Again, what's the rating there? Did they do well in the budget?
So, really, it's a rating of us and how influential we were. On this, I don't think we barely got a pass. So the big sort of digital investment in the future made in Australia is that the federal government and the Queensland government will jointly take equity into a US-based quantum computing developer, PSI Quantum, and that was announced prior to the budget. Another big bet that time will only judge. And in terms of helping industry digitalise, there was $40 million in supporting industry to take up AI, which, is a little bit, but we're already working with CSIRO and our members are benefiting from this kind of investment on, getting AI tools into their hands and to show different applications. So we've had workshops, with around 40 participants with different AI solutions for safety, for clean tech, different uses for generative AI in corporations using corporate data. We've got ones coming up in a couple of weeks on using AI for net zero. So how can you use AI to measure your carbon footprint, to trace your carbon footprint, because you need to evaluate scope 3, etc. So we're already benefiting from that. The controversial thing, though, is that the National AI Centre, NAIC, which has been sitting under CSIRO with the researchers, and we've really valued that connection to researchers, is now moving to Department of Industry. So we wonder what that will be. I have mixed feelings. I think in one way it indicates that this is going to be permanent and it's all about lifting industry rather than just supporting researchers. But I think we've really valued that connection to CSIRO in all our workshops that we've done with NAIC because they have had not just cutting-edge research, but really, commercialised, really practical early-stage research to make sure that companies have access to that kind of input.
I guess in one way that shows the importance to the federal government, though, if they're moving it in-house.
That's right. I wonder if they'll have such freedom on where they spend their money. Anyway, but on the cybersecurity, so a really small but we hope impactful program got a bit of funding in the budget. It's a cyber wardens program. So that's around training, particularly aimed at SMEs, but training staff in best practice. So it's a bit like training fire wardens or first aid officers. So they're not emergency.
It's not actually a word you hear all the time, is it? In sort of general conversation, it seems like someone went searching for a word.
Yeah, well, I think when talking about cybersecurity and privacy, often you do think about safety because I think people now understand it's not a technology problem, it's a people problem. So initially, if you remember with safety, initially we all had, it was all about hard hats and guards and stickers and all that kind of stuff until someone tweaked, doesn't matter what we do, it's about staff behaviour that matters the most and that cultural training. Similarly now with cyber, we started off with firewalls, multi-factor authentication, etc. Now, if you notice, all the cyber training is about people because there was a great podcast I listened to about people being phished, and because if you think who on earth would be phished, you realise that these hackers, ransomwares, cyber criminals, like all scam artists, they are brilliant at human behaviour. And they know what will make you click. So it's really trying to address that behaviour. So I think that program, the 20,000 instant asset write-off of small businesses with annual turnover of less than 10 million, that's been extended. So if the digital tool that you want to buy is under 20,000, well, that's the way to support it. But it's pretty niche and it's not really what we wanted in terms of uplifting digitalisation in industry. The other thing on digitalisation, though, because it's not just industry needs to adjust and keep up, it's also government, and the government is making some really big investments on their own digital infrastructure, particularly in the simplified trade system. So that's to reduce friction at the border, which will support digitalised supply chains, but also in aged care and in Centrelink, what's it called? Services Australia. So the big investments, probably improving privacy, but also improving the whole system. We have a lot of members in the care economy, so I think that may have an impact on them.
Yeah, good.
Hopefully positively.
The third D is diversification, and in that area we ask for funding support for high growth potential businesses in industry. We ask for cyber innovation and supply chain upgrades for defence industry, and to build a migration pipeline for diversification relevant skills. How do we go getting our ideas across there?
Yes. Well, not that great, but I think
we can't win them all, Louise. You can't win them all.
I know, but we try. The Guarantee of Origin scheme is really, I think, if that can be stood up properly and then can be used across the board, I think that will help us in terms of our clean green image, etc., and help those manufacturers whose edge is that it's Australian and all the sort of the halo that goes around that. On innovation, there wasn't any funding, but there is going to be a strategic examination, a big review on R&D and innovation in Australia, and so we'll be part of that. And true diversification, of course, is, who you buy and sell from. And as was announced in the ASEAN Summit, significant investment in building relationships in the regions, again, as a buffer against our reliance on China.
Overall, how did we go with our submissions and the government?
Well, look, I'd give us a 6.5. I think we passed, but I don't think I'd put it on the fridge.
That's good, though, and that's a good outcome from everyone except a highly competitive person like you. We did fine. All this conversation, though, is interesting, particularly Future Mode in Australia, because I was in North Queensland last week, and again, I heard this comment about manufacturing is no longer in Australia. It's some sort of like urban myth that bounces around. And a recent report by Australian Industry Group shows that that's actually not true, that there actually is good growth in our manufacturing sector, including good margin growth. That people are making money despite inflationary pressures. But it's changing. And this relates to something that you said last episode about what manufacturing should be like in Australia. Can you talk to that just for a few minutes?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think that manufacturing is making cars. Really, that's car assembly. It's manufacturing things like brake pads that go into the cars that really matters. And manufacturing is a word. I'm a linguist, so I'm really focused on use of words. And it can mean, making biscuits to making rockets. So it's a pretty broad word and when people say manufacturing doesn't exist, I usually just say, well, what are you thinking about when manufacturing? But, our manufacturing as a whole industry has really rebounded strongly since the pandemic, with material increases in value add, employment, exports, financial performance, and CapEx. So it's not just that they're doing well, but they're investing in themselves and backing themselves. So in terms of real output growth, 2.8%, which is pretty good given, what's happening in the rest of the economy. And
some industries would love to have that growth here.
Yeah, and gross operating profits growth, again, 2.8%. So I think that's, it's well, but it's, of course, not evenly distributed. So it's those parts of the manufacturing sector that I talked about in the last episode, which are high skilled and using high levels of technology. So really that niche, we're not ever going to, but it's unlikely that we'll have great success when it comes to those sorts of commodity level manufacturing, that low tech, low skilled. It's really things like medical devices, particular machinery and equipment where quality really matters, and food products, skincare, medical products. So things that we put in or on our bodies, absolutely, are our niche.
Yeah, and it's all that value add stuff.
Yeah.
By the way, I worked in a supply chain improvement project with a large international truck manufacturer, and they have in Australia a manufacturing plant. And I said, because I'm a frustrated academic, I said, how can this be a manufacturing plant? It's an assembly plant. I can't see what you're doing here that makes it manufacturing. And their argument was, no, we in Australia drive on a different side of the road from most of the world, and so we get our dashboards produced here. We don't produce it. We get the process that includes the clean energy stuff for our engines. There's a lot that we make, and then we put it all together in this factory. But it is a manufacturing plant, and I think if you add that up, that's true. What you said before, the bits that go into the major parts are what we do well and why it can be manufactured in Australia. Mm. Speaking of which, we should talk about a possible future manufacturing industry. The Albanese government released the nation's first national battery strategy, supporting, according to its official release, the future made in Australia and shoring up our economic resilience and security. That's a big statement. That says the global demand for batteries is set to quadruple by 2030 as we head towards net zero. And there was a number of reasons as to why Australia should be in the battery manufacturing industry. I must confess that I've always thought that it's a strange place to make batteries because we're a long way from the world and it's expensive to ship dangerous, heavy items. What's your thoughts? Is this battery strategy a good idea or is it still being worked out?
Look, when you talk to CSIRO, they don't actually use the word batteries. They use the word energy storage. And I think that's a much better way of thinking about it. If we only talk about batteries, that's all we keep making. I think we need to be thinking.
So batteries are old ideas, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's a sort of old thing, yeah. It's so also dumb.
That's right. The problem statement is how can we have storable energy that's mobile, essentially?
Okay.
And then it can be used in all sorts of different applications. So I think you spoke with Anthony Kittle on the Supply Circles podcast. They do energy storage. I think they don't really talk about batteries as such. I think again niche applications there is a possibility, but for the most part at the moment, batteries will be an assembly level program.
The theory, though, is that we make batteries here because we have critical minerals, so we can do the value add. Isn't that the basic concept of why we should make batteries here? That
is the theory, but we don't process the lithium here. So, all the critical minerals.
Okay. So there's a flaw. Yeah, okay.
So I think we've got to think about, the whole supply chain. We do process some lithium, I think.
Yeah, sure.
But, not in the quantities. And also the nickel, Rio has said that they're going to close down their nickel site in Australia. There's a whole range of critical minerals that we do make, but we do produce, but we don't necessarily process, which will have to come in. I don't know. Even CSIRO said, well, I can't remember how many stages there are from the, raw materials to a finished battery. Let's say there's 10. I think their assessment was, you'd get to around our capability and where it makes sense for the market gets us to about 4 or 5, all the way to 10.
Yeah. And you're going to go back to basic supply chain stuff about where you make it close to source or close to end product. And normally the best place to make it is close to end product because it's cheaper transport.
Well, they're heavy. They often are listed as a dangerous good, so they can't go on airplanes anyway. So, we've got then the vagaries of sea freight. There's just a whole lot of challenges where it doesn't really make sense from the market point unless there's heavy subsidisation, in which case, we are subsidising because others in the world have said, oh, hey, we want some non-Chinese batteries. And I've been in those conversations. Yeah. That's absolutely what other governments in the world are saying.
And if anyone listening is not quite sure what we're talking about batteries. And if you try and take a battery pack through an airport on the plane, that alone is a hassle. And that's just a little thing in your pocket.
Yeah. Well, I remember speaking to a member who was importing some kind of safety equipment that's used in underground mining. And because it had a tiny little battery in it, it was classed as a dangerous good and they could not get it on any aeroplane.
Yeah, yeah. The next thing we should talk about is nuisance tariffs. Now, according to the official website, on July 1, 2024, this year, the federal government plans to abolish around 500 nuisance tariffs in the biggest unilateral tariff reform in 2 decades. And this is going to boost productivity, reduce compliance costs for businesses, and ease the cost of living for Australian families by over $120 million over the next 4 years. You got to love a big statement. What's it all about, Louise?
So, because 80% of our trade is covered by a free trade agreement, chances are a lot of products can come into the Australian market duty free. But to get to that duty free, there's a lot of paperwork to prove that it fits under the rules of the free trade agreement, et cetera, et cetera. So, what the government has identified, or Treasury identified, is a number of these tariffs where the bulk of supply comes from an FTA partner, most likely China, but not always. And so the products coming into the market, so we're not actually or there's no local industry. So I think, some of the categories are toasters,
toothbrushes or something like that.
Toothbrushes, roller coasters, nuclear plants. I mean,
yeah.
And so for those who do import those things, it's just creating a lot of paperwork. It's a nuisance, and it's not actually protecting anyone. It's not even earning the government a particular money. And of course, we forget that when the industry has to fill out this paperwork, means that someone in government has to check it. So it's a double cost. And when you look at the value of reducing paperwork versus reducing tariffs, it's tenfold the economic benefit. Because tariffs, you could say, well, at least we're bringing in some money. In this case, we're not bringing in money. All we're doing is paperwork, which is a hidden cost by government and industry.
Has it gone far enough? Are you happy with it?
Well, I mean, as someone said, all tariffs are a nuisance for someone. So I think there's still enough, if we do ever get to the point where we seriously start negotiating a free trade agreement with the EU, I think we need to keep the auto tariffs in our pocket, because it's really only European cars now that are paying tariffs. There's a few things that are sort of gold standards that the government won't change.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we could be like Singapore and essentially get rid of all tariffs. But
would you like that?
Well, so we have to remember that tariffs are important. Tariffs are applied to products that are important inputs as well as finished products. And so it's, the impact for industry is going to be mixed and unevenly distributed.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line.
I always remember when we signed the free trade agreement with Thailand, I had a member call me in great distress, and he manufactured furniture and tables, I think, household furniture. And he said, I can't believe we're signing up to this agreement. I'm going to go broke. I'll never survive against Thai product. And I said, okay, well, let's have a look at what the tariffs are today and what they're going to be under the free trade agreement. Anyway, I had to say to him, look, I'm sorry, but they are already zero. You're already competing. And he quickly hung up.
I don't blame him. I would too. Oops, bye.
But it is an important note that sometimes there is a psychological barrier or a psychological assistance in these tariffs that think, oh, okay, well, I've got a 3% headway against my competitors. But with, as I said, 80% of our trade is now covered by an FTA. It'd be very few industries that would consider themselves protected by our tariffs.
What should businesses do?
Well, I think you should look to see if you've got, if you're filling out certificates of origin for products now that you won't need to. From 1st of July, that will save you some paperwork. If you've got a tariff concession order, so if you've paid a consultant to help you get a tariff concession order to get those the tariffs reduced already, because there's no local industry, double check so you don't pay this consultant again, because I wouldn't trust people not to just go through the process automatically. And if you do have fears that it is your products that you're relying on that 3% margin to give you a bit of an edge in the market, then there's still an opportunity to provide feedback into the government.
there's a lot to it. Thank you. That's a nice description. It's been an interesting episode. We have to go. I guess, Louise, have you got any homework for us this month?
I do. So I have our privacy submission on our website, but we'll put in the link in the show notes. I think I understand that the legislation for privacy reform is going to get into Parliament in August, and there's still quite a bit of work to be done from an advocacy point of view to make sure that SMEs are not negatively impacted too much. I think they will be to a certain extent. And also our submission on food manufacturing in Australia.
Oh, so a couple of good crunchy issues to get into, which we'll talk about next episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, remember to like and subscribe, and please tell others about the show. Feel encouraged to view our posts on LinkedIn. Go to my page or Louise's or Australian Industry Group, and please share the posts about the show to your connections and your networks. And as we always say, if you are as opinionated as we are, please give us your feedback or send a question or comment to industry.policy@aigroup.com.au. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Elise. Let's talk next month.
Thanks, James.